Now, the main UN agency set up to assist Palestinian refugees, UNRWA, is facing a cash crisis. UNRWA has said it will run out of money in the coming days after major donor nations suspended their funding. The freeze came after Israel said that several UNRWA workers were involved in the October 7 terror attacks by Hamas. Now, the agency's future is at stake, leaving long-term humanitarian aid for Gaza in doubt.
A lifeline for Gazans or Hamas's partner in terror? This is a question dogging the UN's Palestinian aid agency, and donor countries seem to have answered it for themselves by holding back funds. That puts more than 1 million people at severe risk. For decades, the agency has been a primary source of food and medicine for Gazans. UNRWA was founded in 1949 to help Palestinians who fled or were expelled from their homes when Israel was founded. It originally had a 3-year mandate, but has been renewed ever since there has been no political solution to the conflict. The agency's operations have been especially vital for Gazans since Israel's 2007 blockade of the territory. It also serves Palestinian refugees in the occupied West Bank, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. But many in Israel take a different view. This is Jerusalem's deputy mayor calling "Get out, get out" at a small far-right protest. People at this demonstration want the agency to leave the region entirely. Israel has claimed that 12 UNRWA workers helped plan the October 7 terror attacks, and that many agency workers are affiliated with Hamas or other terror groups in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he sees no future for the agency.
The civil administration of Gaza won't be able to be carried out by those who support or fund terror. This means, too, that we will have to replace UNRWA.
The UN has pushed back, firing the 12 workers in question and saying they don't represent the agency.
That we are doing everything possible to make sure that UNRWA is an organization that not only is effective, necessary, but it is also able to defend itself against infiltrations that can put into question its neutrality.
A U.S. intelligence assessment of Israel's claims said some of the accusations were credible, though they could not be independently verified, but also cast doubt on claims of wider links to militant groups. It's unclear if the report will change the stance of donor countries or what could take UNRWA's place. If aid dries up, it will be ordinary Gazans who suffer.
Let's get more on this now from Jonathan Fowler. He's a spokesman for UNRWA currently in Amman, Jordan, and joins us from there. Jonathan, UNRWA says it's at breaking point as a result of major donors holding back payments. Its operations could be severely disrupted from March onwards. What concrete effect will that have on the situation in Gaza?
Well, thank you very much for having me on today. The immediate effects in Gaza, of course, are simply going to compound the nature of the catastrophe that we're already seeing. We're dealing with an aid operation for 2 million people in Gaza. We're feeding 1.1 million people, and we're sheltering over 1 million. So if you take the funding away from the aid operations in Gaza, then that is going to accelerate the nature of the humanitarian crisis. We're already seeing risk of epidemics, and we're seeing pockets of famine, notably in the north, which has been inaccessible for aid operations since the end of January. So that's the picture in Gaza.
Now, what's the agency doing to give assurances it's carrying out due diligence and has strengthened its oversight regarding neutrality?
First of all, I want to stress when we're talking about accusations against 12 members of staff, and UNRWA has been absolutely categorical in our condemnation of the 7th of October attacks on Israel. But 12 out of 30,000 people working in for UNRWA across the region, that's 0.04%. So that's one point. We should not tarnish an entire agency based on on the accusations against 12 individuals. But what we are doing, and this was concretely stressed in the previous report, was we have two things. One is an independent investigation being run by the UN's top investigative authority, that's the Office of Internal Oversight Services. And then it's separate to that, and in fact this was announced before these accusations against 12 staff emerged. We also have an independent review of UNRWA going on to verify the robustness of our investigative and sanctioning procedures when there are breaches of neutrality, because we always take allegations seriously as an agency, and we always have done.
Now, some Israeli officials say that Palestinians see UNRWA less as an aid provider, but more as a key validator of their Palestinian identity in a never-ending war against Israel. What's your response to that?
Well, we've been in existence for 75 years, but that's not on us. UNRWA was created in response to a refugee crisis, which was the Palestine refugee crisis. It was created by the United Nations in the very early days of the UN. The fact that we're still here all these years later is basically symbolic of a political failure by the international community to solve one of the most protracted refugee crises in modern history. We are a humanitarian organization. We're not a political organization. But it's not about validating a cause. We are a humanitarian organization. And I should stress also that there are UN resolutions which do underscore the fact that refugees, Palestine refugees, like any other refugees, have a right to a just and lasting solution to their plight.
Now, the former UNRWA chief, Matthias Schmale, says that cooperation with Hamas at a certain level was unavailable. Can you understand that it's hard for many people to accept that an aid agency might be working with an authority that represents a terror organization?
Look, the UN works around the world in complex environments. In some of those environments, they may be under the control of de facto authorities or armed groups. But the point is, as humanitarian organizations, we have to work with what we have. We don't have political contacts with Hamas as an organization, but
what kind of contacts do you have then?
Well, practical in the sense of being able to actually function on the ground. This is not just something that happens in Gaza. This is something where any UN entity, any UN aid agency is in operation. That could be anywhere around the world. But it's to ensure that aid actually gets to the people who need it. And we are quite exceptional in that we do deal with the aid operations from A to Z. So we have a direct delivery policy. So there's not middlemen or anything like that involved. So the practical aspects of this are very light touch in terms of contact.
Jonathan Fowler there, spokesman for UNRWA. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Matthias Schmale is a senior UN advisor based in Addis Ababa. He's also a former director of UNRWA in Gaza. Welcome to DW. So when is the organisation projected to run out of money, and what will that look like?
In my understanding, we're a couple of weeks away, so in the course of March, from UNRWA running out of money. For Gaza itself, this would have devastating consequences. Our colleagues on the ground are telling us that at least 500,000 people are facing severe hunger, famine. And UNRWA is by far the biggest agency that can help prevent that. UNRWA, as you know, is also working in 4 other places: Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and the West Bank. And if it runs out of money, essential services like education, schools, and primary healthcare would stop there too. And it can be in no one's interest that children, for example, cannot go to school.
So help us understand where the organisation then is financially. Has all financial aid stopped? Or are you just looking at a substantial, are you looking at a substantial reduction in income?
My understanding is that initial payments were made this year, which have kept the organization going up to now. And the major donors have said that they will wait with further payments until the allegations are clarified through the investigation. So again, in my understanding, indeed, the situation is extremely critical. And in the course of March, if further payments are not made, it may have to stop its essential services.
So given those Israeli allegations about a supposed Hamas infiltration of UNRWA, how does the organisation satisfy donor countries that their funds and aid are not being misused?
Well, up to 7 October, I think donors were convinced that we had robust management, monitoring and disciplinary measures in place. During my time in Gaza of almost 4 years, I sacked 8 employees, one of whom we were able to prove that he was an active member of the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas. The others were other issues. So in my experience with the donors, and I believe it's the same for my successors, in Gaza and elsewhere, was that donors trusted our systems that we had put up to deal with attempts by Hamas to influence the organization.
And there are also Israeli accusations that Palestinians see UNRWA less as an aid provider and more as a sort of reinforcement of the Palestinian struggle. How would you respond to those claims?
Well, I think there is indeed a Palestinian struggle which has little to do with UNRWA itself. The Palestinian struggle is one for self-determination and to get a state, a country, a place they can call home, like you and I, like Israelis themselves. So UNRWA was established with a time limit, in fact. It was 70 years plus ago, set up for 3 years to provide services until the promised Palestinian state would be established. And nothing has changed there. UNRWA is not a political organization to find a just solution. UNRWA is providing services until the United Nations, the General Assembly, the member states find a solution that is accepted by all sides, including the Palestinians.
And since October 7 has happened, we've seen repeated allegations from Israel that things like petrol, diesel, food goes missing that is provided by UNRWA goes to Hamas. Now, in your experience of having dealt with this, does that happen? And how do you go about rooting it out?
Listen, in my time, there was no deviation of aid to Hamas. We had robust systems in place, including systems that involved the Israelis. We could bring nothing into Gaza through Israel that was not approved by them. And that required detailed negotiations on whether, for example, the volume, the amount of cement we were trying to bring in was the right amount to build a school. And, people could come, ambassadors visited us, including the German ambassador. They could see for themselves that the aid provided was translated either into buildings like schools or health centers or into the payment of salaries for almost 9,000 teachers teaching in our, at my time, 278 schools. So in my time, and I believe it's been the same since, there has been no deviation of aid. We have to, of course, understand right now there's a terrible war, and UNRWA has lost control over many of its installations because of the war. The Israelis asked them to move to the south of the Gaza Strip. So, of course, the robust monitoring systems are severely undermined in this situation of active conflict.
OK, thank you for talking us through that so clearly. Matthias Schmale, Senior UN Advisor and former UNRWA Director in Gaza. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, it's not just Palestinians in Gaza who fear being cut off if UNRWA runs out of funds. The agency also provides assistance in host countries like Lebanon, which is home to more than 250,000 refugees. Our correspondent Mohammed Chetra reports from Beirut.
This is what life looks like in the Shatila refugee camp of Beirut. It is one of 12 Palestine refugee camps across Lebanon. They all depend on one organization to survive: UNRWA. Nuha is 82. She suffers from hypertension and diabetes. UNRWA's clinic is the only healthcare facility she can afford. It has been providing her medicine for the past 12 years, so the news of UNRWA's unprecedented cash crisis is troubling her.
How will I get the medicine? Death would be better for me. I have no support but God.
Another crucial service provided by UNRWA, garbage collection. The camp will sink in trash in less than 24 hours if UNRWA does not collect the garbage, one official tells us. For children, UNRWA schools offer options in an environment full of danger.
Without UNRWA schools, our children will end up on the streets or in coffee shops, probably armed. They would use drugs, especially since drug dealers are all over the place, and it would be much easier to recruit these children off the streets.
The future of those school children depends on UNRWA. So does the health of those at the clinic. It is not just that UNRWA also pays rent and provides essentials like water and electricity. It is effectively the state in places like this. Without the services that UNRWA currently provides, 250,000 Palestinians across Lebanon would be utterly destitute and increasingly desperate.
I can't describe how people will react if UNRWA stops. There will be riots and violent protests. It's not going to be easy.
UNRWA is struggling to keep a lid on feelings of frustration.
They're very, very worried. There's fear, there's anxiety, and it fosters and deepens a sense of hopelessness that's already present. So we're now starting to see refugees show up in our offices and yelling at our staff in great frustration and despair, and threatening to come back.
UNRWA has no mandate to secure Palestinian refugees' return to what used to be their homes, but most Palestinians refuse to separate its service delivery from the right for return. The two issues are deeply intertwined in the minds of the refugees.
Dissolving UNRWA would end the Palestinian cause and the right for return, but also an end to all the social, educational and medical services that it provides.
In crisis-hit Lebanon, and near the beginning of the month of Ramadan, the refugees' needs for UNRWA services is more critical than ever.